Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Today we celebrate our 300th episode in over 7 years of Changing Higher Ed. It's been a wonderful ride, and I'm pleased to have a special guest for this episode, Lynn Pasquerella, President of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Lynn is one of the top people in higher ed, one of the good guys, who believes in the power of liberal education and has led the path in transforming an institution. But before I get to introducing Lynn, I want to give a shout out to the people who have made these 300 episodes possible. First, the many guests we've had over the 7.5 years of Changing Higher Ed. I truly feel blessed to have made the acquaintance of so many luminaries and experts in our industry. And I want to say a special thank you to all of you for sharing your thoughts, your insights, and most importantly, yourself on the program. Second, I want to say thank you to my team who makes this all possible. Tamara Taylor, Show Up Strong, who takes care of my website, the writing, and the SEO. David White of David White Voice, my sound engineer who makes my guests and me sound so much smarter. At least me. Without you both, we wouldn't be able to bring Changing Higher Ed to all we touch. Thank you. Lastly, mostly important, I want to say thank you to you, my listeners. In the past 7.5 years, we've had over 125,000 downloads of the program, including over 44,000 last year. I'm humbled by these numbers, and it's all because of your loyalty and interest that we've kept going. Thank you. On to the podcast. I'm proud to welcome Lynn Pasquerella, President of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, as my guest for episode 300. Lynn joined AAC&U in 2016 after serving as president of Mount Holyoke College. She's held multiple positions in higher education, including provost at the University of Hartford, vice provost for academic affairs, and dean of the graduate school at the University of Rhode Island, where she taught for more than 2 decades. Lynn is a philosopher whose work has combined teaching and scholarship with local and global engagement, and has written extensively on medical ethics, metaphysics, public policy, and the philosophy of law. Lynn is recognized throughout our industry with multiple honorary degrees from places such as Elizabethtown College, Bishop's University, University of South Florida, University of Hartford, University of Rhode Island, Mount Holyoke College, among others, and was named by Diverse Issues in Higher Education as one of America's top 35 women leaders. Lynn is the product of a liberal education, and she joins me today to talk about higher ed, where it is, where it needs to go, and how we get there. Lynn, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad we're having a chance to do this finally after so long. And a shout out, this is my 300th episode, and I'm truly honored that you're willing to come on the show for me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, we're going to get started. AAC&U is doing some amazing things. Before we get into the background, give us a little bit about your background, if you would. How did you get to be part of AAC&U? Because you've got a fabulous one.
Well, I grew up in a small town in northeastern Connecticut, and my parents didn't have the opportunity to go to high school. My father joined the war effort at the age of 16 after Pearl Harbor Day, and my mother got married at 16 at a time when you couldn't be married and be in school. And so she gave up her dream of being an English teacher. Both my parents spent their lives working in factories. And by the time I was 11, my mother was a single parent. And when I had the opportunity to go to college on a full scholarship at my state's flagship, I made a decision to stay home and attend a local community college that had just opened up in the small rural town in which I lived so that I could be a caregiver to her. She had become chronically ill. And
Mm.
I had the opportunity to study only because I received funding under the Comprehensive Employment Training Act. And at the time, CETA funds were reserved for those at the lowest socioeconomic rungs who were thought of as being permanently unemployable. So I worked 35 hours a week while attending community college, and then in 2 years transferred to Mount Holyoke, and within another 2 years was off to Brown for my PhD in philosophy. Now, when I graduated with a deep and abiding commitment to access to education, regardless of socioeconomic background, to the centrality of liberal education, an education that had transformed my life, and to political scientist Benjamin Barber's notion of colleges and universities as civic missions, where we not only educate people to be free, but we free them to be educable by serving as a visible force in the lives of those who are most underserved in our society.
And that really is my view of what higher education should be. You know, you and I have discussed the Clark Care model, the public good, as well as leading to jobs. Interesting, though, you mentioned Mount Holyoke. My grandmother graduated from Mount Holyoke back in the early 1900s and taught English at a high school in Boston.
It is an extraordinary institution. When I went, it was because I had an advisor at the community college who said, "You need to go to Mount Holyoke. It's a place for serious-minded women." And indeed it is. And its mission from its founder, Mary Lyon, to promote purposeful engagement in the world is something we need more than ever.
It certainly is. Higher ed's going through some major challenges right now. But tell me a little bit about AAC&U. I've had Ashley Finley on the program a number of times. You've done some great research on things. Tell us about what it's about.
AAC&U has a mission of advancing the democratic purposes of higher education by promoting equity, innovation, and excellence in liberal education. So we believe in that inextricable link between liberal education, the kind of education that frees one's mind from past dispositions and allows one to imagine the possibility that some of one's most fundamentally held beliefs might actually be mistaken, and our nation's historic mission of educating for democracy. It is the type of education that prepares you for success in work, citizenship, and life. And at a time when there are questions being raised about the value of higher education in general and liberal education in particular, it's a privilege to be a part of an association that is advancing higher education's public and personal purposes.
Mm-hmm. And you said something in when talking about AACU, the definition of liberal education. As I understand what you're saying in my own interpretation, it's not just history or political science. Frankly, it's liberalizing the mind, not red versus blue or whatever, but allowing the mind to go where it needs to go. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's exactly right. And the origins of the term liberal education came from the Stoics, who really wanted to liberate the mind through an education that would prepare a free citizen for engagement in democracy. And so it is helping students to think critically, to propose, construct, evaluate arguments, to be mindful of the dangers of ideological filtering, but perhaps most importantly, to engage in humanistic identification, imagining what it's like to be in the shoes of another different from oneself.
We say that all the time. You don't know somebody until you walk a mile in their shoes, and that's exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
Well, AAC&U, it's been around a while, but it really came into its being with COVID and the events around COVID. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
It's interesting because AAC&U emerged in 1915, and it was at a time that was politically quite similar to what's happening now. There
Really?
was, yes, so there was a lot of concern about what was happening in college and university classrooms and attempts to silence faculty and to control a curriculum. There was a push toward pre-professional technical education, but also a military education, given what was happening worldwide.
Mhm.
And so this group of presidents got together wanting to, in the wake of the Morrill Act and the Second Morrill Act that was focusing on public institutions to double down on the usefulness of a liberal education in times of global dissension and turmoil. Today, we saw with COVID-19, with the polarization and partisanship that was catalyzed by that, and the growing mistrust in not only higher education, but scientific expertise, the need to make clear the value of the kind of education that we've talked about. And our colleague Tony Carnevale, who was at the Center for Education and the Workforce at Georgetown, issued a report on taming authoritarian attitudes. And he talks about the ways in which American higher education is distinctive in the liberal education it offers, but how that really works against authoritarian tendencies. Those who are liberally educated are less likely to fall into the trap of following authoritarian autocratic leaders and to question the truth of what's being told. And so we know the value of a liberal education on a number of levels.
Yeah. And that questioning is what's getting a lot of people in trouble right now. We've seen that at many, quote, woke institutions where faculty are questioning what's going on. Much of their questioning, though, is based in research, is it not?
Well, yes. Higher education, colleges and universities have always served as social critics. And it's one of the reasons that universities are often attacked first when there are efforts to impose an ideological agenda by authoritarian autocratic leaders. And so that role is critically important. And it's one of the reasons that higher education has served as a cornerstone of the American dream. And I fear that there's been a decoupling of higher education from the American dream in ways that are likely to exacerbate what I think is the most significant challenge we are facing right now, and that is a growing economic and racial segregation in higher education.
And we've heard talk of this in the news, the K recovery, where the folks who are very well off seem to be getting much richer, and those who are less well off seem to be getting much poorer.
That's right. And I talked about my experience. So people are having similar experiences, but in the absence of those safety nets that were put in place for those who had been denied access in the past to higher education. And I think about what's propelling that. And in part, it's because we no longer view higher education as a public good. It's viewed almost exclusively in terms of a private commodity, tuition in exchange for jobs. But it was not so long ago, in 1965, when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Higher Education Act into law at the Southwest Texas State College, where he had attended, that he was conveying public sentiment around the value of higher education. And he said, here the seeds were planted in me that grew my firm conviction that for the individual, education is a path to achievement and fulfillment. For the nation, it's a path to a society that's not only free, but civilized. And for the world, it's a path to peace, for it's education that places reason over force. And I'm afraid now we have lapsed into a post-truth era in which controlling the narrative is more important than the facts, and where force trumps, excuse the pun, everything else.
Well, I remember years ago studying and looking at the three kinds of change where you have incremental, transformational, and then revolutionary. And applying the revolutionary to the political system, the way you get revolutionary or revolution is controlling the money, controlling the press, and controlling the military. And it's not so much where it becomes one or the other. It's usually just a general merging over to that area till all of a sudden people look back and go, where's my freedom of speech? It isn't here anymore.
That's right. It's incremental, and it's dangerous to not pay attention to the ongoing erosion of academic freedom, institutional autonomy, shared governance that is occurring as a result of the political environment, which is serving as a backdrop to what's happening today.
Yes, and it's not the first time in America's history. I can remember reading about the McCarthy era and some of the things happening back then that are happening now, but it's the political landscape is shaping higher education, I think, far more than it ever has.
I think that's right. We certainly have seen this. We saw it with the American Revolution. We saw it in World War I, World War II, the McCarthy era, in the Civil War period, and the Reconstruction era after that. There were attempts to control what was being taught. This is unprecedented in terms of its nature and scope. And we know we have Supreme Court cases that have talked about the importance of academic freedom and institutional autonomy. In 1957, Sweezy versus New Hampshire, which was about loyalty oaths and the ability to teach certain things in the classroom. One of the justices in the court wrote in an opinion that academic freedom is of paramount value, not only to higher education, but to society itself. And he said, because of that, colleges and universities must have the right to determine for themselves who gets admitted, what is taught, how it is taught, and by whom. Each one of those rights has been upended as a result of what's happening today. 10 years later, a court ruled again in Kishian versus Board of Regents around similar issues that we have to guard against casting the pall of orthodoxy across our classrooms. And yet here too, we are seeing an effort to impose a particular ideological agenda through the dismantling of DEI, through the elimination of certain programs, proscriptions against certain speech, the casting of a pall of orthodoxy across our classrooms. And so we must be mindful of what happened, what we can learn from the past in terms of the McCarthy era and other efforts to chill speech, and make sure that we're not making the same mistakes, that we're speaking out in defense of the core principles that are fundamental to the strength of American higher education.
Amen, sister. It's going to be, for me, interesting to be able to look back 50 years from now, maybe even 25, and to see what's going on. There seems to be a changing of the narrative around higher education, but yet we know that higher ed is the single best driver for socioeconomic change and improvement. You yourself is a great example of that.
That's right. So for a couple of decades now, we've heard concern about the unsustainability of the financial model for higher education. And there has been widespread and growing concern that higher education is too expensive, too difficult to access, isn't teaching students 21st century skills, and that we are bastions of liberal progressivism intent on brainwashing the next generation of snowflakes to melt at the slightest abrasion of their sensibilities. So,
I'm going to quote that one. Thank you.
So this comes from George Will, who was writing about this when, he was focused on being disinvited from colleges and universities. Now, we have reinforced that false narrative in many ways, and the media has helped us in this regard by positioning places like Harvard, MIT, and Penn as emblematic of all American higher education, when in fact, nearly 40% of our students are educated in community colleges. The real strength of American higher education is the diversity of institutional types. But there is a sense that we exist in the ivory tower as a willful disconnect from the practical matters of everyday life. And we have to redress that by serving as anchors in our communities, demonstrating that our success in the academy is inextricably linked to the psychological, social, economic, educational well-being of those in the communities in which we're located and those we seek to serve. There are leaders like Nancy Cantor from Hunter, who was at Rutgers, Newark, and Syracuse, who've said we have to stop telling people what we are good at and ask them, what are we good for? And what do you need from us? And until we do that, we're not going to be able to restore public trust in the promise of American higher education and liberal education. So we have to be out in our communities serving people through the work that we do.
I couldn't agree more. And I am seeing more and more of that. One institution that I bring up frequently is Cal State San Marcos, because I was
Mhm,
involved with
mhm.
them for quite a while. Their previous president, Karen Haynes, did an incredible job. She herself was a first generation student, came from a lower socioeconomic background
Mhm.
and moved on, president of two universities, et cetera. Just an incredible woman. What they did there was they set up advisory boards
Mhm.
with the local community. They had them for each of the colleges there. They had it for the overall university. Yes, you paid to be on that, but didn't matter. You were having an input into what was going on, and it wasn't just all faculty driven. It was faculty driven with input from the community as to what they needed for graduates.
Yes, and I think that's more important than ever as we see the distress among families about whether college is worth the investment, the ways in which there's uncertainty around the proliferation of AI, what that will mean for future employability. Will the jobs that their students are
Mhm.
preparing for exist in the future? And so we have to ensure that we are integrating a curriculum and career. We're not viewing this as a false dichotomy between college preparation and graduation and career preparation. And the way to do that is to build it into the curriculum to ensure that students are given practice in the skills, competencies, and dispositions necessary to help them not only enter the workforce, but to advance in their careers. We
Mhm.
know from recent studies that come out of the University of California that the highest percentage of students ever, 87.9% of students, say the primary reason they're going to college is to get a better job. And yet, more than 95% of college graduates say that they want more than just a job. They want a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives.
Mhm.
And I think this is something that we have to have a reckoning with. How are we preparing students for lives of meaning and purpose in addition to helping them get a job?
All very valid points. It's almost as if there are three C's that have to come out of an education. There has to be the ability to, what's the word I'm looking for? I had it just a minute ago. I guess, that fourth cup of coffee probably wasn't good for me. I don't know. But citizenship, you've got
Mhm,
to prepare for citizenship.
mhm,
You've got to prepare people for careers. And that career one is incredibly important because, just like you said, with the proliferation of AI, there's jobs out there that haven't even been imagined
mhm,
yet. And so you've got competency and cognitive abilities. I remember the old saying from back years ago: undergraduate, you train your mind. For masters, you're training for a particular career, and a PhD is you're bringing new knowledge into being.
mhm.
That's very broad, but if you don't know the jobs, you don't know what jobs are going to be out there in 10 years, you're training people's minds, the cognitive aspects of the minds, to be able to adapt, to be able to be curious about what's going on, and to be able to go back and get other education if necessary or learn on the job. Does that make sense?
It does. I think a world in which there's global interdependence and where rapidly changing technology means rapid obsolescence, the best education that we can offer our students is one that allows them to be adaptable and flexible in the face of change, to
Hmm.
speak across differences, to practice that humanistic identification every single day. And I worry we are at a point where, for the first time, that we've been keeping these statistics, mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and despair are surpassing financial considerations as the primary reason that students are either dropping out of college or not attending in the first place. And so we have to look at how we are educating the whole student. In the past, we've thought, well, that's not our job. We're disciplinary
Mm-mm.
experts. We'll deliver a curriculum. They're on their own. And that can no longer be the case if we want to fulfill the public and personal purposes of higher education.
And what I'm hearing you say is we need to reimagine higher education, more collaboration, less siloed.
That's right. We certainly have to have more integrative learning. But I think about my colleague, Sia Sheldon, who works on cognitive bandwidth. And she talks about the ways in which racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, other forms of discrimination, along with food and shelter insecurity, actually reduce the capacity of students to learn. It diminishes their cognitive bandwidth. And
Hmm.
the way to restore that bandwidth is through radically reimagining higher education. But she points out that the biggest bandwidth stealer of all is belonging uncertainty. And so I think about what's happening with DACA students, with the elimination of DEI, the attack on certain disciplinary fields like gender studies, African American studies, Asian studies.
Hmm.
So they're being removed from the curriculum, offices being shuttered, initiatives being shut down, sends a message to certain students that you don't belong here, that we don't value you. And that is having, I fear, a profound and lasting impact on American higher education.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And so there needs to be a changing of higher ed. We've talked about that. And until we change, I don't see a change in the political spectrum. Do you?
No, I think we have to change. And I think a lot about Carol Dweck's groundbreaking work on mindsets and her critical insights that
Hmm.
underscores the importance of establishing growth mindsets in developing students' talents and abilities within the classroom. Says for far too long we focused on this fixed mindset and we give students standardized tests asking them to answer questions for which we already know the answers, when instead we should be asking them to grapple with the complex unscripted problems of the future, of which COVID-19 was emblematic. And I think that it truly is more important than ever at a time when, by almost all accounts, students are becoming increasingly disengaged and they're not concerned with this high stakes testing and memorization as much as they are about engaging in deeper, more joyful learning. And that's something Dweck
Hmm.
advocates. So, how do we do this in the classroom? And we hear this narrative, we're not into edutainment, I'm not an entertainer. And yet, we can do both. We can be serious scholars and also engage in pedagogies of kindness. We can create hope circuits. We can practice trauma informed pedagogies in ways that ensure that all students feel a sense of welcome and belonging, and where we don't reinscribe this notion of colleges and universities as existing within an ivory tower, but recognize that the problems that people face as individuals in our classrooms and in our communities cannot be left at the gates of the academy.
Yeah. So that's the first way of how do we get there? What do we need to do? We talked also about restoring the trust, and you mentioned something about that earlier.
Mhm.
Institutions of higher education are typically anchors in the community. And you mentioned a Sterling College in Vermont.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, Sterling College is closing. It was one of the last 8 work colleges in the country where students would go and they would practice what they wanted to do as professions, doing animal husbandry and forestry. The richness and vibrancy of institutions like that through the people they are bringing in, the students, the professors, the staff, but the ongoing engagement with the community really shapes those towns. And it's a loss. I mean, there are ways I think that existing colleges and universities at a larger scale, for instance, Bennington in the same state, is trying to bring those practices through centers on their campus. But I think there's something lost anytime a college closes for those in the campus community, but also those in the extramural community, including helping people in the town imagine life in college, imagine life beyond their front door. So I hope that we can continue to focus on the sustainability and strength of even the smallest colleges who are serving a distinctive student population, because it really does matter to communities and to the strength of the nation.
Yeah. How do we restore the trust with the public? To me, it starts with being able to give students what they need to be successful, not only in a career, but in life as well.
It does. I mentioned earlier being in community, being visible. So co-creating knowledge, making clear that we're not here to disseminate, deliver, or impose knowledge upon you, but we're here to work through the most fundamental questions of human existence, meaning, and purpose together. And so I think that it starts with creating kinships. When I was graduating from Brown, my mother was too ill to come to my commencement. I invited my father. I hadn't lived with him since I was 11, but I was in touch with him. And his response to me was, first of all, I'm not going to spend $1 a gallon to go up that hill in Providence. I don't have the gas money. And second of all, don't you think this makes you better than us? Because it doesn't, and you're not. So I would say a simple congratulations would have been fine, but
Yeah, exactly.
but it made clear to me that he felt threatened by my education. I'm sure
Yes.
on some level he was proud of me. I knew he loved me, and yet I think what was happening is what Michael Sandel, philosopher at Harvard, talks about, and that is that the stigmatization of the poorly educated is the last acceptable prejudice in the United States. And I think many people do feel stigmatized by those of us at colleges and universities who've had the privilege of access to higher education, and they feel like we're looking down on them. So I was able to sit down at the table with my father and have a conversation about why my values were not going to change, that it didn't mean that I thought I was better, but that it was profoundly impactful for me to have access to education. And the question is, how do we have those table conversations around the country with people who are radically different from ourselves, who don't have that immediate connection? We can't do that unless we are in communities and create a kinship with people who are very different, who are already suspicious of what we do. So I think, one of the things that I do is I do a daily radio program on NPR out of AMC in Albany called the Academic Minute. And it's just 90 seconds. It's because it's an academic minute. So
Of course.
yeah, it's introducing listeners to cutting edge research scholarship that's taking place in our classrooms and in our research labs across the country and around the world. And I will often have people write to me and say, "Oh, I had no idea that at universities you did research on childhood asthma or cancer, or that you studied things like knitting and its role in the French Revolution." So, and how would they know? And so, unless we're out there telling people this is what we're doing, we're not just talking about how many angels can dance on the heads of pins, but we're also talking about issues that matter to you: cell phone addiction. How can I get access to health care for a dying parent? All of the issues that are impacting individuals day to day, then we're not going to change those attitudes. So it is serving in our communities, being more transparent, but also welcoming people onto our campuses and making sure that they view us as good neighbors. Because no matter how many times we welcome people onto our campus, into our homes, they're not going to come if they don't feel like you're genuine in your offer. And so, how do we create that sense of welcome and belonging for those who are most skeptical about the academy?
Absolutely. Presidents have a huge role in this too, don't they?
They do. Presidents are skilled at creating ascendant narratives around their institutions, regardless of the circumstances. But what we have to do a better job at is explaining what it is that we contribute to the communities. And there's a lot of discussion around now payment in lieu of taxes or increasing endowment taxes. But colleges and universities contribute every single day to the strength of communities, and we just need to be clearer about that.
And I think we need to get out and toot our horn a little bit more as well. Maybe that's part of what you say for being clear about it.
We do. We need to work with our legislators who are representing the people to say, here's how we're serving the public. And we had a Congressperson, Richie Neal from Massachusetts, spoke at our latest annual meeting. And he said, we love hearing from educators. We love hearing from college and university presidents, particularly those in community colleges, because we know that those people are likely to stay in the area and be our voters. So tell us, tell us what you're doing to help them. And that was a good point.
Oh, yes. The number one value of a politician is to get reelected again.
That's right.
Presidents have got an incredibly difficult role nowadays. It's probably more difficult now than it's ever been in the past. They don't have the luxury to act in the same ways that they did. How can presidents change how they're presenting the academy, how they're presenting what's going on at their institution so that people start to listen and start to see the value?
That's such a great question. It's true that presidents are experiencing an extraordinary level of moral distress as a result of these unprecedented attacks on colleges and universities. And moral distress occurs when you feel coerced into making decisions you believe are unethical, but you feel you have no choice. And in many instances, that moral distress is morphing into a kind of moral injury that comes from the continual erosion of one's moral compass. And we're seeing it in many states in red states in particular, where there are mandates around the curriculum, what can be taught, who can teach it, tenure and promotion, a whole range of issues related to higher ed, that the leaders are asking themselves, how much individual injustice should I countenance for the sake of long-term reform? And in some instances, the answer is none, and those presidents resign. In others, it's, I need to stay here because I think I can be an advocate for our students, faculty, and staff in the position. And so this is what's happening. What you need to do under those circumstances is to build a kind of moral resilience and to surround yourself with people who are truth tellers and who will encourage you to be authentic. And I think about Mary Dana Hinton, who's the president of Hollins in Virginia, and she has a new book out on leading with love. And she says, I've tried everything else, and all that I have left under the current circumstances is to lead with love. And that doesn't mean always doing things that everybody's going to love, but communicating to them that I am interested in you and your best interest, and here's how I will act under all circumstances. And I think we have to rely on that. I mentioned Jessica Riddell, her work on hope circuits. She's a scholar at Bishop's University, and she talks about the ways in which the systems are broken and they're working exactly as they were designed. And she says, rather than trying to fix the systems through this mindset of scarcity, let's take a mindset of abundance and create hope circuits, ways in which we can work together to achieve our shared objectives through imagining a better future. We have to be transparent about who's bearing the real costs of the decision making. But at the same time, we don't need to spiral down into a sense of despair. We can work together to change our perception of what we can do in higher education. So I think those are the approaches that we must take.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this, Lynn. This has been a great conversation. It's not often I get a chance to talk at the 50,000-foot level and be able to bring it down to the lower level. So thank you so much for that.
It's my pleasure, and I'm grateful to you for all that you do. We appreciate it.
Thank you. As we always do, our last two questions. 3 takeaways for university presidents and boards. What do they need to do at this point in time?
I think they do need to be transparent about the decision-making that's taking place, why they are making the decisions they're making, and who is most impacted by those decisions. We must be in our communities to serve as anchors and build the trust necessary to move forward. And we have to stay focused on the fundamental mission and purpose of American higher education, which is to educate for democracy, especially at a time when both higher education and our democracy are facing an existential threat.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you. What's next for you? What's next for AAC&U?
AAC&U has a number of exciting initiatives. We are working on AI in the academy and what that means. We know that almost all employers, 99%, say within the next 5 years that they will expect all students to be proficient in AI in the workplace. And yet 95% of faculty feel that AI is a negative force in the academy, that it's eroding academic integrity, that it is threatening the value of a college degree. There's been some shift in that lately, more optimism around its use, but we're looking at what AI means and how we can prepare students for success through the use of AI, which is not going to go away. We're working on advancing public trust in the academy. We have a new office that is focusing on convenings that will help us to work across the sector with community colleges, HBCUs, research institutions, liberal arts colleges, a whole range of institutions to restore public trust in the promise of higher education in general and liberal education in particular. We continue to do our work around curriculum to career in looking at what employers want from graduates of colleges and universities. We have a number of global initiatives and STEM initiatives looking at how we can train the next generation of leaders in STEM, understanding that the arts, the humanities, the social sciences, and sciences must work together if we have any hope of addressing the grand challenges and wicked problems of the future.
Well, very good. Lynn, thank you again so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to the next time our paths cross.
I do too. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to my guest, Lynn Pasquerella, President of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Lynn, thank you so much for being on the program. I greatly appreciate all that you've done for higher education, you continue to do through AAC&U, and I look forward to the next time our paths cross. To you, my listeners, thanks again for tuning in. See you next week.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.